Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, What We Learned Since Marijuana Was Legalized. My name is Orlando Cooper, one of the graduate assistants at IHEC, and I'll be your moderator. I am assisting Madison, the assistant director for the Illinois Higher Education Center for Alcohol, Other Drug, and Violence Prevention, and we are very excited to be hosting today's event. Before I hand over the microphone to Joe, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about today's webinar and the GoToWebinar platform. For those of you new to using GoToWebinar, you will see the control panel on the right of your screen. This is where you will find the question box that you can type and submit to at the end of the presentation. All attendees will be muted for today's program, but that doesn't mean you still can't participate. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. There you go, Joe. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Orlando. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Joe, and currently I am the program manager for the San Diego County Marijuana Prevention Initiative. I'm also a member of the Prop 64 advisory group. Prop 64 was the proposition that legalized marijuana in California in 2016. I think it was voted in favor of around 60 to 40 split. I'm also a member of the SAMHSA Region 9 Prevention Technology Transfer Center. And I want to just speak a little bit about our alcohol and drug prevention system in San Diego. By no means do we just focus in the county on marijuana. We focus also on prescription drugs and fentanyl, methamphetamine, which has always been an issue in San Diego, and the numbers keep going in the wrong directions, unfortunately. And then we have a binge and underage drinking initiative. And then as well, we have tobacco groups around as well doing prevention. We also have 6 regionals that amplify our prevention message and media groups. So I think our prevention system works well together, and it's small. And I think with the collaboration that we have, it really, I think it does a good job with the resources that we have. So a couple of things about my initiative. We focus on youth. We don't focus on adult use because adult marijuana use, and I use the term marijuana, and some people say, well, marijuana you shouldn't use. I'm going to tell you why I use the term marijuana, and that is, number one, my initiative is called the Marijuana Prevention Initiative. Number two, the marijuana industry wants us to call it cannabis because it sounds benign and it sounds natural. The items and products that we're seeing in the marijuana dispensaries, they look nothing like the naturally growing cannabis in the forests of Asia. So I don't call it cannabis. The stuff we have now is so potent and so modified by human beings that cannabis and marijuana would not even know each other if they were introduced to each other. So that's why. I also want to talk about, this is a important time in history because we are going to have our work cut out for us in the prevention and treatment field. We are coming out of a pandemic. I hope we are. And I know adults are feeling anxious, stressed, isolated, and have been using substances. And unfortunately, I know kids are feeling the same way. And we know this. And I was talking to Orlando before about how easy it is to access alcohol. You can deliver alcohol now. You can deliver marijuana now with very little protocols in place. Everybody's social distance, so it's very hard to even know if the person you're dropping off the delivery for is not a young person. I don't know who's checking IDs. So we all need to get involved, and we all need to remember that if we're suffering as adults, and just imagine what's happening with our young people. I do want to talk about some policy dates when it comes to California, because California was the first state to actually pass medical use. And this was way back in 1996. I think one of the reasons this happened was during the 90s and 80s, we had the AIDS crisis, which was going on, and California was impacted heavily. And I think that marijuana was seen as being therapeutic for people with AIDS wasting syndrome, which, by the way, today we don't see much of with the advent of antiretroviral medicines. So we passed medical use in 1996. Then we passed a medical card program, which allowed 18 and up, which I think is way too young to get a medical card. And then, as you can see, we progressed to 2016 when we finally have legalization, and then recreational sales began in 2018. The problem, my first problem with California is we should not be allowing 18-year-olds to access marijuana when we know that the brain develops until 25, and you should probably be staying away from the cannabinoids in marijuana until at least 25 or 26 to allow the brain to develop properly. But with medical marijuana, we still have this provision where an 18-year-old can go into a recreational store and get access to those products, which could be upwards of potency of 80 to 90%. It's also, if you have a medical card, less expensive. Recreational use, usually the products have a 15% excise tax. So I wanted to give data first because, you know, as a prevention campaign, our work has to start with data. Especially when you're discussing marijuana, you always have people not believing what you're saying or trying to tell you you don't know what you're talking about. You really can't argue with the facts, you know, and then if you want to argue with the facts, that's another issue. I don't know, maybe you need to see a psychiatrist or something else. But MPI, our group, Marijuana Prevention Initiative, continuously monitors trends in youth use. And we compile data not only locally from our California Healthy Kids Survey, nationally monitoring the future, ER visits, poison control, and we have our new report. If you go to ccrconsulting.org/MPI, all of our information is there for the public to see. I'm going to be discussing national data, and I'll be discussing some local data as well. There will be room for questions at the end if anybody has. SANDAG, by the way, is the San Diego Association of Governments. They keep a lot of data about juvenile involved youth and the patterns of use. And we have a community survey that San Diego does, which really helps us inform our work as well. I want to jump right in because there's a lot of talk about race and ethnicity, and there's a lot of division in our country right now. But when we look at the California Healthy Kids Survey, when it comes to past 30-day marijuana use, we can see here that there isn't much difference between whites, African Americans, and Latinos when it comes to past 30-day marijuana use. If you look at the yellow line, that's your average 11th grader. So past 30-day use hovers around 17%, 16%, 15%. The biggest difference in use patterns is when we look at the green line. The green line is broken down as to non-traditional schools, those kids that are attending continuation and community day schools. These kids traditionally have attendance issues and academic issues, and that's where we put a lot of our resources into why are these numbers so high and what can we do to decrease them. We also look at e-cigarette and vaping. Again, you'll see there isn't a lot of difference between use patterns. Now, the reasons groups use, I don't know. That would have to be another survey. But again, just looking at the use patterns, all for your average 11th graders, it's around 16%, 11 to 16. It's not that big of a difference. When we look at monitoring the future, which has been around for 45 years, we definitely know that vaping has become a big issue. Vaping is taking off amongst all grades in our county and nationally. And it sort of skyrocketed over the last 2 to 3 years. The vaping industry, Juul, heavily marketed on social media. And now we have these devices who never went through proper testing being handed out all over the place. And by the way, vaping devices are considered hazardous waste and I'm going to get into that. You shouldn't be throwing them in the garbage. Both the battery and the cartridge is considered hazardous waste, dangerous for the environment. Monitoring the future is also showing a troubling pattern, which is decreasing perception of harm. The potency of marijuana is skyrocketing, and the perception of harm is going down. Back in my day, your average marijuana herb was 3 to 5%, and now we're seeing products advertised anywhere from 60 to 99% potency, which is THC, the psychoactive chemical, or tetrahydrocannabinol. I get asked this question a lot in my county. Why am I always talking about marijuana? It's not harmful. Well, it's the primary drug of choice for adolescents in drug treatment, ages 12 to 17 in our county. They're not making this up that they're having a problem with it. It's mostly young men. And it's been the primary drug of choice for 10 years. For 18 to 25-year-olds, the primary drug of choice in our county is methamphetamine. Cannabis use disorder is also a real thing. The same way there's alcohol use disorder and tobacco use disorder, it's increasing tolerance, repeated attempts to control use, spending a lot of time using. You know, I have friends that smoke marijuana, and they don't ever want to believe me when I say, look, you can become addicted to this stuff. But it amazes me that we'll be sitting and watching a movie, and in the middle of the movie, one of my marijuana smoking friends has to go out and smoke marijuana. And I say, you know, what happened to where all of a sudden you had to jump off the couch and go use marijuana? I don't understand. What was that calling? If you're not addicted to it or you don't feel compelled to use it, you know, why are you going out in the rain and smoking? There's also withdrawal from marijuana. You have to remember that we have cannabinoid receptors all throughout our body, in our intestines, in our brains, and marijuana is filled with cannabinoids. CBD, THC are all cannabinoid chemicals. And I know when my friends have tried to quit or take a break, they are definitely depressed and their mood changes. And they're tired and constantly yawning. They're irritable. They're craving the marijuana. They have stomach issues. You say, why do you have stomach issues? Again, because you have cannabinoid receptors all throughout your body. We know that human exposure cases have increased from poison control to the tune of 180% increase. This is because we have a lot of marijuana tourists, people who come in who aren't familiar with marijuana. They jump into the deep end and they use an edible that might be 70% THC. That will land you in the hospital, either from a seizure or a psychotic episode or drug interactions. Marijuana has hundreds of drug interactions with over-the-counter medications, both CBD and THC. Here are our current emergency department visits related to marijuana. While we were telling everybody to stay away from the hospitals, we had 29 marijuana-related ER visits in San Diego a day for things like cannabinoid hyperemesis, seizures, accidents, mental health issues. And again, people say, well, how do you end up in the hospital for marijuana? Well, if you're using 86% on a daily basis, it can affect your mental health, panic attacks, seizures, psychosis, heart palpitations. So people are saying, what is cannabinoid hyperemesis? I never heard of it. Well, CH syndrome was only really discussed about 10 years ago. And as I said, we have cannabinoid receptors all throughout the body and in our intestines. So we know that small amounts of THC can actually help with nausea related to chemotherapy. And people have been using the FDA-approved medication Marinol. But when you use too much marijuana over years and years, you can actually trigger the desire to vomit and also stomach issues. And another interesting symptom is the desire to take hot showers to relieve the stomach issues. Now, unfortunately, because not many people in the medical community know about this, your average CH patient goes through about $100,000 in medical bills before they're accurately diagnosed. So if you know any of your friends that are having stomach issues and they've been smoking, it's mostly related to smoking marijuana over many years. You might want to say, hey, today I learned about cannabinoid hyperemesis. Maybe you should give the weed a break for a week or two and see if your symptoms are alleviated. You can rub over-the-counter capsaicin cream on your stomach, but that's not a long-term solution to this problem. Some facts about marijuana, it's really as simple as this slide. Certain plants have harmful chemicals that are not meant for human consumption. THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, the main psychoactive cannabinoid chemical in marijuana, is the plant's chemical defense mechanism. So what is a defense mechanism? It's meant to keep predators away from using it. It's not meant to be altered and then given out to our kids. Other plants have harmful chemicals in them as well. The coca plant, where we get cocaine. Tobacco has the nicotine chemical. Poison ivy. The poppy flower has opioids, or we get opioids from the poppy flower. So I don't know why marijuana always gets a pass when people say you can't be addicted to it because it's a plant. You look at all of these other plant-based drugs and they can be addictive. So here's a little breakdown because I'm going to be using these terms a lot. THC, if you took THC out of the marijuana plant, I wouldn't have a job because that's the psychoactive one. That's the one that's responsible for the problems with mental health as we know it, the problems with driving. CBD, or cannabidiol, is often talked about as a therapeutic supplement that isn't psychoactive and actually counteracts the THC high, which is true. Now, CBD also has side effects, and I'm going to get into those. So we know that this is being definitely modified to become more potent. Back in the 80s, when I was a kid, the average marijuana potency was around 5 to 10%. And being from the East Coast, we didn't get half as good marijuana as they had in California. California has been growing weed for 60 years or even longer. And it was mostly herb. Today, the herb, the bud, I've seen bud strains that can be 33% THC. And the oils and vapes can be 99%, soon to be 100 probably. We also know when you vape, you are delivering a higher amount of THC directly into your bloodstream. And edibles react differently, and I'll get into those as well. So when we talk about inhaling marijuana, we're generally talking about 3 different ways. There's smoking, which usually involves the actual burning of the plant material. Now, because marijuana herb has a slower combustible rate of burning, you often hear people coughing after they're using it. That's because they're inhaling a lot of unburnt plant material, which can cause respiratory issues. Dabbing involves making the marijuana oil into more of a wax so that you can actually put a dab of that mixture onto some kind of a device and then put it onto the heated coil of the vape pen or into a bong, as you can see on the upper right-hand corner. This stuff can be really potent, this wax. And then you have vaping. You know, vaping devices, there's usually 2 of them, the one that's preloaded or the one that you can actually load yourself and you can keep adding whatever mixture you come up with. I want to talk about marijuana as medicine for a minute here, since we have a lot of time. The Surgeon General, the ex-Surgeon General, came out, and he was a really good guy. I had a chance to meet the Surgeon General, and he always talks about his brother's drug problems. And he was the first Surgeon General since C. Everett Koop in the 80s that came out and made a position about marijuana. And he said no amount of marijuana use during pregnancy or adolescence is known to be safe. And until more is known about the safety and long-term impact, the safest choice for both pregnant women is not to use in adolescence. And I really appreciate this because We need to take a stand. We have a lot of states opening up. They're calling this medicine, and I don't ever call it medicine unless you're discussing the FDA approved medicine. And this is why. We just don't allow people to vote on what a medicine is. It's not a good way of putting out a medicine, is to take it to a popular vote. I don't know how many of you out there would say, you know what, I'm taking the vaccine for COVID because it was voted on by a popular vote. You want them to be doing clinical trials and animal testing and research. And then the doctor gives you a thorough examination, which we know is not happening with medical marijuana, to see if you are going to have side effects or drug interactions. And if anybody wants to see how many drug interactions, they can go to a website called drugs.com to see the hundreds of drug interactions with CBD, THC, and over-the-counter prescription medicines. Also, labeling is important on medicines because it tells us what an effective dose. When you smoke marijuana, you're getting 400 other chemicals. And you can't really dose a plant. You can't dose how much smoke you're going to take in. Also, there's side effects. There's a proper listing of ingredients. A lot of people who think they're consuming CBD products are actually popping positive for THC at work while they're getting drug tested, thinking that there wasn't any THC because the labeling was wrong. There's also product uniformity throughout available locations. We have a wrongful death lawsuit, and I think once the lawyers get involved in the marijuana industry, we'll see some change. But here we had a 24-year-old flight attendant who flew in. She had a tropical hybrid gummy bear. She ended up having a seizure and dying. And now she's suing several edible companies for not properly warning about the side effects. We know that the marijuana industry is very nervous about this. It's on most of their blogs. If they want to be treated like the alcohol industry, they're going to have the proper warning labels about side effects and drug interactions, and not using if you have pre-existing mental health issues. If you want marijuana as medicine, you can go to your doctor and get Epidiolex, which is a pure form of CBD. It's FDA approved. You know how much you're getting. Now, when people talk about medical marijuana, it's not like it's good for everything. This is good for a certain subset of seizure disorders in kids, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and Dravet syndrome. When you take this, it possibly helps with the seizures, and I'm happy about that. When you are asking about side effects about CBD, just read the package insert for Epidiolex. Things like suicide, liver damage, somnolence, sleep disorders. It can interact with blood thinners like Coumadin. If you want to know if your supplements have gone through any kind of testing, then they should have this USP label. That means that it was verified by some government agency that the ingredients are properly listed as to what you're getting. I'm not the only one talking about marijuana as medicine. There are several medical societies that have said you should probably not use marijuana if you have lung issues, heart issues, seizure disorders. Glaucoma Society says you shouldn't be using it. And we provided this as a handout, and I can provide it to anybody who would like it. It's on our website as well. So what are the other risks? I mentioned a lot. I mean, my job is very clear. My job in prevention is to keep kids as free from drugs until about 25 or 26. We say keep them alive until 25. And that's because you can see here from the CDC, the younger you start using marijuana, alcohol, or tobacco, which are the three gateways really, the more likelihood you have of becoming a substance use user on a chronic basis. And it's important to let us develop our brains properly until around 25 or 26. Now, this seems like an easy goal, but you know, kids will be kids and they are looking and discovering new things. But that's why we're here, so they can develop the proper coping skills. When people say to me, why do you think people are using marijuana? Why do you think people are using alcohol. Well, I'm an alcoholic myself, and I know some of the reasons why I use, because I was trying to push aside some uncomfortable feelings that I might not have had the proper coping skills to deal with. But when I stopped using alcohol, I found that I still had all of these unattended to feelings. And I'm glad 10 years sober now that I had the chance to deal with those, because all I was really doing was dulling the effects of whatever was making me feel bad. And I never would have gotten to what the issue was. Um, More science is coming out about brain development, and it's really, really, like I said, important to try and keep your brain as healthy as possible during these years. That means not sustaining a head injury. That also means staying away from alcohol. I grew up in a house where both my parents smoked cigarettes. My dad was an alcoholic. Great man, I love him. But it was very tough to be giving me a prevention messages about alcohol, and I go into the refrigerator and all there is beer and wine. If anybody doesn't believe me about the risks related to marijuana, we have multiple brain scan studies right here at UCSD. They've had a Center for Cannabis Research since '97. They have documented changes in brain scans from users to non-users. You're also overloading your dopamine system. I notice when my friend who wants to stop, she seems kind of down. And that's because she's used to dealing with a drug that is keeping her dopamine system at a certain elevated level. When that comes down, it's coming down back to normal. But your system is off because it's so used to being hit with this chemical from marijuana. It's going to take a while to adjust back. Edibles are more of a head high. So when you ingest edibles, you may not feel anything for an hour on an empty stomach. The problem is during that hour, you think that whatever you got was not a good batch. So you start consuming more of it. And this is where you can actually have a problem, because the high from edibles, because it's eaten and it has to go through your digestive system and then funneled through your liver, can take 4 to 8 hours to a day to get out of your system. That can be a scary thing if you're having a psychotic episode or you're hearing voices to hurt yourself or hurt others. If you have a family history of mental health, I would not be using marijuana. And that's because of the next slide I'm going to show you. But not only is there a probability of developing psychosis, which is a subset called marijuana psychosis, but also it can interfere with your over-the-counter mental health medications. And they have actually identified a gene linked to psychosis, that if you have this AKT1 gene and you smoke marijuana, you have a 7-time increased risk of psychosis. So what is psychosis? Psychosis could be visual. I see something that's following me. Psychosis could be auditory. I hear a voice that's telling me to hurt myself or hurt others. The problem with the psychosis here is that in some people, it has awakened psychosis that doesn't go away. And you can look at the suicide rates in both Colorado and Washington to see that. This is going to be a problem as we open up access to marijuana in other states. We also don't have a test at this point to see who has this AKT1 gene. So I would say if you have a genetic history of mental health issues in your family, I probably wouldn't use. People say that it's good for PTSD. Well, this is actually from the Veterans Affairs website. There is no evidence at this time that marijuana is an effective treatment for PTSD. In fact, research suggests that marijuana can be harmful to individuals with PTSD. And again, we don't want people to be thinking that this is making them better and actually it's making them worse. My advice to you is always consult a doctor before you take any substance in. If you don't believe what I'm saying, go to your doctor, your health practitioner, whoever, somebody with a medical degree. Marijuana in pregnancy. Unfortunately, a lot more women are admitting to using marijuana during pregnancy. You shouldn't be doing this. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists have put out a statement. You can also pass THC through breast milk up to 6 days, and you're passing that directly on to your child. So here's a poster. It's in English and Spanish. If you have a healthcare facility or a college, you should probably put this up. This is a big question I get. Is marijuana harmful to a developing fetus? Yes, it is. There should also be a driver warning. It definitely impairs your driving, and I have some bad statistics here. Even though we told people to stay off the road in San Diego, we had higher crashes and accidents. Nationally, we've also had it. What do you think this is from? Polysubstance use. This is from drugs. This is from the perception that marijuana makes me a safer driver. It actually doesn't. So I'd be very careful. We have more kids admitting to driving and packing their friends in the car as well after they consume, because they have this perception that it's harmless. Vaping marijuana. These are your devices. Now look at the middle one. That tends to be, a very popular one. And why is that? Because it looks like a thumb drive. I mean, a teacher isn't going to know whether this is a thumb drive or whatever. It's easy to use. There's not a lot of residue. And usually it comes with an adapter that can recharge it. The other one on the right, I'm asthmatic, and this looks just like my inhaler. So you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. The reason I don't like vaping devices is they basically hit the market without ever being fully researched for long or short-term impacts. And we know that we have this E-valley lung injury that's lingering around. We still don't know what the reason is. But there's two chemicals that have been associated with that. There's THC and vitamin E acetate. Vape pens are also considered hazardous waste. If you're going to tell teachers to confiscate these, you have to give them a protocol. They're not supposed to be putting these in a shelf or a drawer or throwing them in the garbage. They're not good for the environment. This whole notion of, well, vaping devices are better than smoking. Well, the problem is most kids who use vaping devices have never used cigarettes. And it would be interesting for everybody to know that, guess who's buying into the vaping and marijuana industry? Well, Philip Morris, which is now Altria Group. They're lobbying for the vaping industry. They're lobbying for the marijuana industry. The same Philip Morris that was lobbying hard for menthol cigarettes in communities of color. The same ones we hear on the commercials that were saying we know about the cancer risk. Well, they're now backing the vaping and the marijuana industry. Why are kids vaping? You know, it's much stealthier. It's easier to use. You don't have all of that grit on your fingertips from breaking up the seeds and stems. You don't smell like weed as much. Vaping versus smoking, as I alluded to before, a recent study by Johns Hopkins said that there is a greater psychological and physiological effect from vaping as opposed to smoking. And it also enters your bloodstream quicker through vaping. There is still a lot to be determined about vaping, but it's kind of like we're doing that experimentation on our kids right now because they weren't properly tested before they hit the market. Is it really vape? Is it really mist? It's more of an aerosol. And when it's tested, you can actually see the particles on your shirt. So I don't know, mist sounds really harmless. It's more of an aerosol coming out of these. Look at what else is in a vape cartridge. It's not just the marijuana, the THC, terpenes, hydrosols, vitamin E acetate, which might be linked to this lung injury, propylene glycol, which is what make fog machines smell the way they do and have that fog. It's a vegetable additive, a food additive. But you're ingesting all of this, and there's been no proper studies on what all of this other stuff does to you. They're also exploding. And I'm not making this up. The batteries go bad. There are several injuries. They're always being reported. I don't know if anybody has seen these. Broken teeth, burns. Those lithium ion batteries are not safe. We had one go off last week, well, March 18th, on a flight from Sacramento to San Diego. This wasn't even on the person's pocket. It was melting and it started a fire. By the way, you're not supposed to have vaping pens on a flight. We also found fentanyl in a vape pen, and I'm sorry to say that fentanyl is having a huge impact here in San Diego. And I have to talk about fentanyl because fentanyl is often added to other drugs without the person knowing. If you look at a lethal dose of fentanyl here, you can see that it's a lot less fentanyl that it takes to kill somebody than heroin. And in many cases, we've had a case recently where a baby was crawling on the floor and the mom was using fentanyl and some of it went on the floor and the baby went over it and inhaled it and the baby wound up overdosing on fentanyl. It's very, very dangerous. Here are some of our numbers during the pandemic. 47% increase in overdoses in the last year. 950 overdose deaths in 2020. We have triple the fentanyl overdose deaths in the same period in 2019. This year, DUI crashes were higher than San Diego County's worst year in 2017. This was not a good year. Lockdowns are not good for human beings. And I think there's going to be more to come out. Here's some more about fentanyl. Fentanyl is often added to common drugs, and unfortunately now marijuana, but cocaine, methamphetamine. Some people that think they overdosed on, let's say, meth, when they give the drug test results, and I'm glad our local hospitals have added fentanyl to the drug panel, they were completely unaware that fentanyl was in their drug. They thought they overdosed from meth. So be very careful that common drugs might in some cases have fentanyl. That's why it's so troubling and scary to think that our kids are inquisitive about drug use, and one-time use can actually kill them now. Here it is, the protocol for disposing of vape pens, and again, teachers should not be handling these without gloves. There should be a proper protocol for storage while you're waiting to get rid of these. And then you have to go to a special dump site. You shouldn't be throwing these in the garbage. Both the batteries and the existing liquid are considered hazardous waste. We do have a vape take-back day that was connected to our prescription drug take-back. This was halted during the pandemic, but we're going to start this again. This is yet another way of getting rid of those devices. I want to talk about the lung injury that still is going on, by the way. This was the epidemic before the pandemic. So we started seeing this lung injury right in the Midwest in Wisconsin. And, you know, I follow the news and I said, oh, this is interesting. These kids who were previously healthy were all of a sudden waking up in the hospital with severe lung injuries. And they all had a history of vaping. By August of 2019, there were 215 cases in 25 states. Breathing difficulty, shortness of breath, chest pain, fevers, and fatigue. In many cases, patients have also acknowledged the recent use of e-cigarettes containing THC. By October of that year, we had almost every state involved. You can see some of the hot spots. There's Illinois, there's California. Really impacting a lot of states. It's a diagnosis of exclusion. So a chest x-ray or a CT scan shows hazy looking spots in the lungs. It contrasts with a clear black space in the healthy lungs. There's no other type of lung infection detected. There's also a history of vaping. So this has been linked to two chemicals, both THC and vitamin E acetate. We still don't know, this is still going on. We had about 7 or 8 cases diagnosed here in San Diego during the pandemic. which, by the way, made it much more difficult while people are handling the other respiratory issue that's killing people, to have this one on top of it. These are the numbers locally. Nationally, there's about 70 deaths and over 3,000 hospitalized, 62 local cases in San Diego. About 90% of the cases were linked to THC-filled cartridges. We did have a death in the summer of a woman, unfortunately. We also had the first successful double lung transplant. This was a previously healthy 17-year-old boy who vaped and wound up needing a double lung transplant. As far as I know, he's doing well still, and that's good. Prevention and COVID. As I said before, this is a tough time, and as schools are opening up, I think we're going to need a lot more boots on the ground help in the substance use, prevention, treatment field, and those types of things. But to be promoting a smokable drug during a time of a respiratory pandemic just doesn't seem like very good public health policy to me, and I'm being kind. COVID is a respiratory illness. We also know that risk factors in developing a worse case of COVID are smoking and vaping. This is right on the CDC website. We're also going to be dealing with increased mental health issues due to isolation, lack of enforcement around ABC regulations, and protocols around access and deliveries. California declared marijuana an essential business. It should not be. There is no way that any public health person should be promoting access to a smokable drug when it could be a risk factor in COVID. Some prevention tools now that I went through the gamut of issues. So what is prevention? I hear a lot of people that are down on prevention, thinking it's say no to drugs and kooky slogans and all of this other things. It isn't any of those things, at least not the way I do it. It's not doom and gloom. It's not one size fits all. I'm very aware of my own story, and I'm free to share that with anybody. I'm not demonizing anybody for using, but I do think that there are resources available, and everyone should know about it. I've had my own personal stories. Prevention is the first line of defense. If I did my job properly, hopefully those kids ages 12 to 25 won't be using chronically. After my first line of defense, that's where law enforcement gets involved and treatment gets involved. So again, it's a very simple task to raise awareness, but it's not an easy job. And we try to get the word out several different ways, through traditional media, social media, doing things like this, spreading the word. The best prevention tool is you. When you see policies that you're upset about, and you say to somebody like me, why is this happening? I want to ask you, when was the last time you spoke at city council? When was the last time you joined the PTA? When was the last time you attended a school board meeting? All of us need to be involved if we don't like what's currently happening. I have made so many comments on the board of supervisors and city council, they know me by now. And the data backs up the science. We also have to say that most youth do not use. This is a really important thing. We don't want kids to feel, when we do our prevention message, that they're being left out, the ones who aren't chronically using, because not everybody is using. If everybody was using, our society would have collapsed a long time ago. I want to talk about the industry promises that didn't happen, and you can see here, these are just some. The black market is going to go away and vaporize into space. Illegal manufacturing has become more sophisticated and dangerous. I mean, those butane hash oil production, we had 14 firefighters in Los Angeles recently taken to the hospital because of an illegal butane hash oil lab. On-site consumption, we promise we won't want on-site consumption. Guess what they want? On-site consumption. Little to no oversight from our new Bureau of Cannabis Control. advertising that target low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, despite community complaints, delivery services not checking IDs when the package is dropped off, and non-FDA pot allowed at K through 12 schools, which I never thought I would see ever. So let's talk about this myth about the black market. The cartels are never going to go away, unfortunately. They make a huge amount of money from two things, from the sale of drugs and from human trafficking. And I hate to break this to everyone, but there is going to be a black market until somebody comes up with a drug or a potion that can cure drug addiction and substance use disorder. We did decriminalize marijuana in 2010, and currently no one is in jail in San Diego County for marijuana possession. But marijuana is the primary drug of choice for youth ages 12 to 17, which is why I will continue to advocate for all of our youth in the county. The pot consumption lounges flies in the face of smoke-free policies. They're now wanting you to be able to consume marijuana inside of a closed space, yet we have smoke-free outdoor dining bans. This makes no sense. Smoke is smoke, whether it's from marijuana or cigarettes. It's not good. And we also know that you can pick up active levels of THC. We know this from Colorado. By the way, Washington and Colorado have some great data on the long-term effects of legalization. Young kids were coming into the hospital with severe bronchitis, and they were testing them. They came back for active levels of THC. They were ready to call CPS on the parents. The parents admitted they were smoking around the child. So if you're hotboxing, you can actually pick up detectable levels of THC. We've also been updating our social host ordinances because we know a lot of use occurs at private parties. So this social host law will hold adults accountable for any use of alcohol, marijuana, controlled substance in that space. We have had a hard time negotiating with marijuana industry because they keep sticking all of the billboards and advertising in communities of color and disadvantaged communities. And we have parents telling us, why does my child have to stand at the bus stop and see all of the alcohol advertisement, smoke shop advertisement, and marijuana advertisement, when you go over to a rich community and you don't see any billboards or advertising? We also developed a marijuana-specific lease addendum for anybody that, and I am a big proponent of this, because marijuana smoke irritates my asthma. And I want to know when I'm going to a building that I'm going to be living in or raising my children that they don't allow marijuana. This lease addendum we actually developed with housing attorneys, so it should stand the test of time. We also developed a youth drug driving campaign because our state refuses to do anything about marijuana and driving. So we did our own county program called Put Drug Driving on Your Radar. And this involves a media campaign, partnering with city council, rallies around the holidays, just the same way you would see around drunk driving. We have a prevention toolkit that we have for other states that are going through the legalization process. One of the things we did before legalization took a hold and we knew it was going to pass was we had the school develop a letter saying nothing has changed on school campus, even though the state may have be recreationalized, that you still have drug-free workplaces, that you still have a school policy regarding medical use on campus, which has come up. And we keep data, current data. Here is the marijuana tax revenue that has gone back to prevention. I would not be doing any justice if I said that, yes, marijuana money has gone back, but it in no way reflects the billions of dollars that they're making. I am actually part of this committee that has allocated 3 rounds of funding to communities of color disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. And the first round was 21 million and the second round was 29 million. And the third round is going to be a lot more. But by no means does this equate to anywhere near what the industry is making. And by the way, now that we have Canada and Mexico that are legal, I know Mexico is considering it, we have a lot more money being made in those countries that have made it legal. Some recommendations for other states: collect data. You can decriminalize possession without allowing sales. I don't know why these two are always connected. You cannot lock somebody up, which I am all for, without creating a McDonald's for marijuana. You can limit the THC potency. Right now, when I go into a dispensary, the owner is very proud to say that his best-selling product is 86%. That is a huge amount for a developing brain to be taking in. Develop a drug driving campaign. We have teen recovery centers on campus because we had a lot of parents who were unable to drive their kids. Now we have them right on the campus. Drug tests. There should be an age limit, and to be honest, the drinking age should be 25, and so should marijuana possession. But I wouldn't be making too many friends if I said that. We need to have protocols that are actually adhered to for delivery and advertising. And then there should be a safe vape disposal for every campus. If you're going to ask teachers to take this hazardous waste away, they need proper recommendations on how to do that. All schools should have access to Narcan. We know that fentanyl is a problem. In many cases, the kids don't even know that fentanyl was in their drug. We passed something where all San Diego schools have at least 1 or 2 Narcan ready to go. We have Good Samaritan laws because we were seeing that kids were dropping their friends off at the emergency room without staying with their friend because they feared that they were going to get charged with possession. It is important that you never let your friends sleep it off and that you stay with your friend if you are lucid to tell the medical staff what you were doing, because your friend is losing critical time when they can't tell the nurses or doctors how they overdosed. You won't get charged with the possession, and neither will your friend. If you need help for marijuana, I'm not demonizing anybody. The same way there's Alcoholics Anonymous, there's Marijuana Anonymous. And it's never been easier to join a group. You can join via Zoom. You can go in and not even show your video. You don't have to say anything. You can just listen. And let me tell you, we have a very active Marijuana Anonymous here in San Diego. And I don't know how many YouTube videos I've seen lately for people trying to quit. I almost think they feel guilty in even admitting it's a problem, but it can be a problem. If you don't believe me, ask a doctor, ask a physician, ask a nurse practitioner. Always ask whenever you're going to take a chemical into your body, especially due to those drug interactions. Here are our resources. We have the toolkit available. If Orlando, and by the way, Orlando, I want to thank you for hosting this, but if you want any of our resources, I could always send you anything that we discussed right here. But our website is pretty easy to navigate. We do have a YouTube page. We recently did a media event about the numbers I just discussed. And I would love to take any questions right now that anyone has.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation, Joe. And as you said, if there's any questions, we'll wait a little bit so you can type them out and I'll read them out for Joe.
Couldn't have been that thorough.
questions, guys? We have a comment. It says, "Thank you for the great presentation. It was very informative."
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. And you have my email and everybody does. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question now, you know, I just want to say something. I was talking to Orlando about this. You know, the last thing I ever want to see if I was a kid, in school, having a prevention person come in and talking down to me, or somebody who I feel didn't represent me, who had a wonderful life and never experienced problems. I mean, I have pretty much done and seen it all. I'm not a perfect person, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I was an alcoholic. I'm not ashamed to admit that my dad was. He was an excellent father, but he didn't know that genetically he had this disease, and that we didn't know that it can run in families, and that he needed treatment. We didn't talk about this stuff 30 years ago. It was always seen as, taboo. But I usually try to deliver the prevention message, you know, in a non-polarizing way using facts. And the kids are very smart. They don't want to be talked down to. They want to see somebody though that's representative of their community.
We have questions now. One of
Okay.
them is, "What's your stand on CBD use and the effects?"
Well, I think, like I said, you should read the package insert for Epidiolex. And then another problem we're seeing is the mislabeling of CBD and hemp. So hemp is supposedly 0.03 or less of THC. But a lot of people who thought they were using hemp seeds or hemp oil, they were drug tested at work and they're popping positive for THC. So improper labeling is the problem. But as far as CBD, I would consult with a doctor before I use CBD, just because of the drug interactions. And again, go to drugs.com if you don't believe me.
Next question is, "What is the first step to preventing marijuana use in apartments that already have no smoking policies?"
Well, this is a tough one because you're probably going to face some pushback. I think my first step would be going to the property manager and recording it and saying, look, I want to ask you what your stance is on marijuana. Do you have an addendum? And if they don't, that might be a problem. It's the best way to do it is to go to a building beforehand and make sure that their lease talks about smoke-free policies that include marijuana. After the fact, I think the best way is to go to the property manager and talk about it first. Because they may have an addendum that you don't even know about, because usually these leases are 40,000 pages long. So there might be something in there. Check the lease first.
Another question is, "Could you go back to the recommendation slide?"
Sure.
And then, uh, someone wants to know, "Will this presentation be available after the fact?"
Of course.
Mm, I think those are all the questions for today. Oh, wait a minute, never mind. We have one more.
Okay.
"Hi Joe, do you have any additional recommendations for marijuana prevention programming events for community colleges to get students engaged?"
Well, I can tell you, I'm sure you know about SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. There's another website called Getting It Right from the Start, and um, it's a great website for policies and laws. Um, I think, one of the things I do in my own prevention campaign is we continuously do engagement nights, community engagement nights. We talk about this. We do a lot of reaching out to our medical community. And we have a very vocal emergency room doctor that will come around and speak. And, it's not always easy to get a doctor to come and speak, on their own time, but I think it really makes the talk a lot more professional when you have an actual doctor who's answering your questions from a medical standpoint. So connect with a few of the different sectors in the community. Make sure it's ongoing. I got to tell you, marijuana is a very tough issue to talk about. People want to laugh it off in the beginning. So that's why right from the beginning, it's best to know as much as you can yourself before you dive in. Because if you don't know what you're talking about, you're going to lose people. And the credibility goes with it. So learn as much as you can. There are other groups. I'm here to help you. But I think you can have community nights. I think you can develop resources like we did if you go to our website. The first thing to do is start with data. Do we even have a problem? Many people will think they know what the problem is. They say, oh, I know vaping is a problem. Well, let's see what the data is. What does the data at our school say? Because it could be completely something different. You might have a meth problem when you think you have a cocaine problem. So start with the data, go from there.
Do you have an educational program for health professionals?
I don't specifically, the DEA does. We don't come up with curriculum based. We do have resources and materials, but the DEA has some for kids. For professionals, I come out and I do trainings, and I usually partner with another gentleman who's been in the treatment field and talks about cannabis use disorder. He's been in the field for 18 years, and we can come to other states, and we'd be more than happy to do trainings. I've done multi-day trainings, you know.
Hmm. I think those are all the questions. So I'll finish this with a closing statement. Please keep an eye out for an email from GoToWebinar that will come about an hour after the program. The email will have a link for you to fill out an evaluation. This evaluation will really help us with the planning of future events. Certificates will be issued within 7 to 10 business days from the webinar, and we will have the webinar available to view on the iHeck website. Thank you. And thank you, Joe, for presenting that wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Okay.